Let's talk a bit about CA Sofia, because I think what they've done is very interesting in terms of the Total War situation. If you were here last October and you saw my review of Pharaoh back then, you know that I wasn't all positive about it. In fact, it was quite the 50-50 overview actually. I was positive to a lot of what it did in terms of core mechanics. I feel like Pharaoh was a natural progression from Troy in that it added quite a lot, but it was also very samey, and as basically everyone pointed out, Pharaoh was a carbon copy of Troy, but with a different coat of paint essentially, and a few tweaks rather than perhaps a true revamp. But if you remember Troy changed a lot during its lifetime. Troy essentially began as the legend behind the myth game, where they tried to make this mythical type of Total War game that was part fantasy, part history, and nobody liked that. I don't know if I even saw one person who wrote a nice comment about that setup. It didn't please the Warhammer type fans, it didn't please the Age of Mythology type fans who came from Age of Empires or who liked that type of setting, and it certainly didn't please the historical fans like myself, and you know, I also am a fan of fantasy, but it depends on the type of fantasy. And I think that when Total War fans like me have been waiting and actually clamoring for a historical game for a long time, and you finally get that return to ancient Greece, the legend behind the myth, which wasn't either or, that was a big disappointment. Now, despite that, I actually liked Troy quite a lot. That's what's interesting here. I liked what CA Sofia did for its fundamentals, which is also why when CA Sofia finally released the Mythos version, which essentially is Troy 2.0, I was really happy. That actually made Troy a very playable, super fun game. Sure, as a lot of Total War games, it has engine problems, it doesn't have the best fundamentals when it comes to certain fields of battle, and I've said that many times before, but as a game, the Mythos version really made Troy what it always should have been, and especially since it aimed at Greece almost exclusively, and that sort of ancient period where we don't really know what happened that much, adding mythology to that to make it truly fantasy-like, it made sense. And even though it took quite a while, I can confidently say that CA Sofia delivered, and they proved then that they know how to make a great game, not just one that feels kind of weird, but a game that actually knows what it wants to be. And I think they understood that after the backlash, that in the beginning they didn't really know who they wanted to cater to, when what they needed was an actual direction that people outspokenly said they wanted. And that was what Mythos was. Now, the historical side of that, the historical mode it added, that wasn't all that good. It didn't add much, in fact it mostly retracted things, so I'm kind of exclusively talking about Mythos here. But what it proved was that CA Sofia knows how to turn things around. In fact, they have already done it years before with Rome 2's Empire Divided campaign, which added a ton of features that I personally can't live without in Rome 2 when I play that game. Features which feel fundamental to the game, in the same way that Mythos now feel fundamental to Troy to me. Now, what's kinda sad is that CA Sofia needed to learn that lesson twice, because when Pharaoh released, it rubbed everybody wrong. It performed probably way worse than Troy did. People like me who have an open mind, let's say cautiously optimistic, just didn't have much fun in that game. It didn't offer that sense of direction that I craved, even though it admittedly offered a historical type game that didn't venture into the legend behind the myth territory. And even though I appreciate that, Pharaoh just didn't offer those historical mechanics that I liked. Now, what Pharaoh did offer was a bunch of mechanics that actually worked quite well. I think the court mechanic is pretty good for that. That sort of simulates that inter-kingdom conflict and intrigue. That's pretty cool. The power of the crown system simulates that further by simulating civil wars, legitimacy conflicts, and so on. And it also took from Troy the deities and revamped it quite a little. And I really like the deity mechanic since it makes religion quite a lot of fun than just having, let's say, Greek religion or Egyptian religion. I really like this more granular approach to religion here, and it makes sense since people had temples to the various gods after all. But what really hurt was the fact that we had already had Troy, which on its own kinda lacked that massive Bronze Age feel, which of course everyone pointed out, and then Pharaoh came and kind of did the same, only offering Egypt, the Levant, and Anatolia Anatolia. And while it's a bigger map than Troy in terms of, regional inclusion, it didn't feature Greece and Western Anatolia, which we felt like we'd already spent money on kind of, and which would go so seamlessly with this new map. But it also didn't feature Babylon and Mesopotamia, which to a lot of people, including me, feel ultra integral to the Bronze Age, even more so than Greece. But I think the fact that we felt like we were missing out on something we felt were natural and something that we had already bought kind of, that hurt, and people said that immediately. And what happens with Pharaoh is of course that it's a flop, I assume. The player numbers aren't great, the reviews aren't great, the coverage isn't great, the comments are not great, nothing is good about this. And it feels really bad because we all want to like the games we buy, right? We hope that CA had learned something from Troy and that in the next historical game that they would include everything that people wanted, at least more of it, that they would take more of the feedback to heart and just be a bit more proactive, maybe make the next Bronze Age game more holistic and more all-encompassing. And of course, Pharaoh wasn't that. And of course what happens is that not even a year later, we go from having only Egypt essentially to having the entire map we always wanted, right? And this is awesome. It's what I wanted, it's what everybody wanted. It looks fantastic. Having Greece back on this massive map is essentially a dream come true that I certainly didn't believe would happen actually when Pharaoh released. I thought it was just going to be like, okay, now this is an Egypt, Anatolia, and Levant game. We're never going to get the full Bronze Age experience with Babylon and Western Anatolia and the Aegean. But here it is. And again, CA Sofia shows that they are the comeback kid essentially. They are able to take the criticism, they are able to see, okay, what do people actually want and what can we do about it, right? But here's the thing. Why do we have to wait a year or two for this to happen? Why do we have to have this initial bomb of a game where everybody turns sour, everybody's disappointed? Like, we love Total War games, we want them to succeed and we want to feel like, okay, this is awesome, this is what I've been waiting for, right? And for CA, I think it's important too that, fans love what they make, that they can show people that our games sell and we have a secure, good thing for the future. I think that if there's one thing that CA needs to take to heart after Pharaoh and after Troy, even after Rome 2 honestly, since CA Sofia came in and essentially saved that game as well, is let your games be complete on launch. At least if not complete, then let them be a complete experience that people have said that they want. And that feels full, that feels holistic, that feels like that it's not just one region out of many that should be in the game, but that it feels like a full game that includes all the things that you feel should be in a game about X and Y. In Rome 2, it was the family trees, it was the political system on the map, and not just the completely lackluster political system that was at the launch of the game, but everything that came with CA Sofia's updates. And in the exact same vein, what people wanted from Pharaoh wasn't just a game about pharaohs in like way back when, right? This is not a game about the Alexander days where people are very familiar with things, where it's a wide sort of scope going from Greece to India and Egypt to, Seleucia, because that would be natural in an Alexander game. But in a game about a pharaoh, I guess it's natural that it would take place in Egypt as a focal point. But what Pharaoh felt like, and what felt like the natural progression after Troy, wasn't just a Pharaoh game, it was a Bronze Age game. Because that's exactly what people craved from Troy to begin with. Now, I think CA knew this from the get-go. I believe they knew that people wanted a massive map. I believe they thought people would expect to have Agamemnon and Troy in the next Bronze Age game. I think that in a game set so close to the Middle East and essentially the Bronze Age era, that Mesopotamia and Babylon would be in it, because they're just so crucial to this era, right? And when you have that sort of chance at this map that goes from the west to the east, south to north, that you make it happen. Now, it took CA Sofia 9 months to release the dynasty update for Pharaoh, and for such a massive change, this is a completely new game. I'll just say that right out. This is not Pharaoh on launch. This is Total War Bronze Age. They should have called this update that. And for 9 months, that is impressive. But I feel like it also insinuates that they could have taken those 9 months and just not released the game in that time and shipped the game like this. You know, with these sea peoples included, with the bug fixes, with the Blood and Gore DLC, and with the Dynasty update and all of its merits, because there are a lot of merits here. This is a completely different game. And I've said that a bunch of times, but it's true. It just is so frustrating, honestly, to experience that a studio that you have a lot of love for, and CA Sofia, which is the miniature version of that studio and which did so well with Rome 2. And you know, Troy, you could tell it had a ton of passion behind it. It wasn't all that, at least in the beginning. And Pharaoh felt like even less, even with the experience CA Sofia had from Troy and with the feedback they had gotten. And in many ways, Pharaoh was more than Troy. But it didn't feel like it since we had already had Troy, and because we had given them so much feedback on what we wanted, that Pharaoh, in its initial state, it would never live up to what people wanted, what they craved, what they'd asked for, and what they thought CA Sofia had learned from. And you know, not only have CA Sofia expanded the map, that's probably just the most awesome thing here. They've of course added entirely new factions, we have new naming conventions here, so we have Mycena and Troy instead of Agamemnon and Priam, we have Assyria and Babylon instead of those unspeakable names that I can't pronounce. And we of course have the dynasty itself, this family tree that we've always craved as players in Total War games. And this is the first deep return since Attila in many ways. I guess Three Kingdoms in some ways had a family tree and characters interaction, a lot of it, but not to this extent and not in this way. And they did a really good job of it. Not only can you marry from inside your own faction, but externally as well to forge new relations, better relations. You can force inheritances to put your family members on the thrones of other kingdoms. You can peacefully ascend to the kinghood now of different kingdoms by, you know, doing family interaction stuff over time and, you know, put people in various places. You have your own dynasty legacy whereby doing different actions in the game in its various aspects, you become the type of dynasty that you want or accidentally stumble into, and you get different bonuses from that. There's so many cool aspects here. Choosing your own heir, you know. We can change our capital now, rename cities. This is what we've wanted, right? And there are so many awesome changes here, so many cool changes, so many aspects that I wish was here at launch that should have been there, that I'm baffled that it wasn't, because people gave them feedback, blah blah blah, right? You know the drill by now. But it was interesting that in one of CA's blog posts from, I don't know if it was last year or earlier this year, they did mention that in terms of Pharaoh, they had been planning on extending the map at some point, or at least trying to make that happen, but that they hadn't been able to do it in time of release, or once they managed to expand the map, it was because they had managed to fight the code and, you know, revamp the engine to make that happen. And I'm sure that was an issue. I'm not gonna doubt them on that. I don't know coding, I don't know the engine. We all know or suspect that the engine is, you know, spaghetti code. It's an old engine that's been built upon in many layers. There's bound to be problems and difficulties, and the fact that they managed to revamp this entire map and frankly game as they did, I'm very happy about that. And it's clear that Pharaoh is from the older strand of the engine, because I think the clear sign of that is the fact that Pharaoh doesn't have the 7-player multiplayer option, which Warhammer 3 has, and as such it has to be a strand of the Troy engine, not Warhammer 3, which all of this sounds like jargon, I know, I don't even fully understand it, but it makes sense to a certain extent. But they managed to do this in 9 months, and I believe that when Pharaoh did ship, they probably knew they were going to make it at some point. Probably they didn't know exactly when, but it likely would have been baffling if they weren't able to do it at all. And so they probably concluded that we need to ship a game now, we need to make it for the, you know, financial quarter, whatever, and we want some hype around the historical fan base and, you know, a new Total War game. And I think in their desperation, you know, the high price, the cutting corners in certain ways, the not listening to all the feedback, even though, you know, they added banners and stuff, which awesome, but in terms of the grand scheme of things, it didn't do that much. And it's telling because only a few months later, that's when we got the big price drop. That's when they made the Sea People's DLC free. And they also announced later, of course, that this Dynasty update would also be free. if they had waited 9 months or a few months to see if revamping the campaign map would be possible, I think that Pharaoh, as it is now, would definitely have been worth the initial asking price. Because now Pharaoh is deeper, larger, more interesting, more fun, has more factions, more mechanics than Troy ever did, is more varied in my opinion than Three Kingdoms ever was, is more interesting than Warhammer is in my opinion. Of course that's, completely a matter of your taste, and that's a fantasy thing as well, but this is the complete Bronze Age game now. And if they had shipped this version, we and CA would have saved ourselves a ton of headaches. Now, that's not to say that Pharaoh is perfect. Many things can be done better, they always can. But as I said, CA Sofia, the comeback kid. Now that can be taken as a positive moniker. In this case, it is. But I would rather that CA Sofia was just the GOAT from the start. That they would say, don't call it a comeback, because we're already the kid, And the thing is that Pharaoh Dynasties edition, Troy Mythos and Rome 2 Empire Divided, it shows that CA Sofia knows how to make awesome Total War experiences. It shows that they know how to take feedback. But what they need to learn, or what CA headquarters or whoever is in charge need to allow them to do, is take their time, interact with them like they're doing with the blog post, telling people what's up, accepting feedback at least to a degree, and to make sure that they are completely happy with the game they shipped. And that's not to say that they weren't with Pharaoh, but I think they knew what people wanted even at that stage. And I feel bad, honestly, as a person, not as a consumer, I feel bad for the employees at CA Sofia, because I know they have passion, I know they have expertise, I know they know their stuff. So please, I'm just begging at this point, next time, if CA Sofia makes another game, give them all the money, give them all the time. They know how to make Total War when they're given the opportunity to do so, okay? I don't know who was in charge of the decision to publish Pharaoh when they did. Maybe it was CA Sofia internally, maybe not. Whatever the thing, let them cook, okay? Because we now have a full course meal. This is the Pharaoh Bronze Age we wanted. It's not gonna satisfy the haters. It doesn't satisfy me 100%. There are things with the combat I would like improved. I always want to build my roads right. I want naval battles. I want catapults, even though it's ahistorical. I don't care. I just want to have fun. Thing is, Pharaoh Dynasties is a ton of fun even without all of that shit, okay? And I'm really happy that it is. So I'm just saying, Pharaoh Dynasties, awesome game. Next time, let him cook, okay? Let him cook, boys and girls, and it's all gonna be good. And so, let me know your thoughts on Total War Pharaoh Dynasties in the comments. Let me know your thoughts on CA Sofia and what they can do to improve for next time, if anything. And as always, leave a like, subscribe to the channel. I hope you like this new format that I'm trying out. And thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Cheers.